Grade 8s, welcome to your Wednesday math. I hope you guys had an amazing long weekend, enjoyed the one nice day we had, as well as hopefully you'll be able to enjoy some of the nice days we're supposed to have later on this week. So we're going to do our next part of rotations today. So I'm going to start off with a review as usual about rotating single points, and then we're going to go into rotating shapes like triangles and polygons and things like that. And then that will essentially be it. So we're only doing rotations about the origin, as in 0, 0. Later on in grade 9 or so, you will do other points. It's not very, you don't do a ton of it, it's only a little bit, but it's a very similar process. It's just easiest to do it from the origin when starting out. So let's do our review. So I'm going to do a 1 point. We're going to do a 90 degree, a 180, and 270. I'm going to do a clockwise rotation, and then we're going to do counterclockwise as well, just so it's a little bit of a reminder, because rotating a shape is basically the same thing, except instead of turning 1 point, you're just turning 3 or more points. So if I have the point W, which is -3, +2, if I'm rotating it clockwise into this quadrant, so this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4, where is this point going to end up? Well, if I'm rotating it, essentially what happens is these two numbers become reversed, so it becomes 2, -3. However, if it's in this quadrant, you see how the quadrant 1, both numbers are positive. That means this cannot be a negative number, because if I just reversed it, all that's going to happen is it's going to be 2 and -3. So it's going to end up down here. And that's not what we want. So we reverse it. So our 90-degree rotation is reversed, and then this becomes a +3. So it becomes +2, +3. So +2 and +3 is our W rotation, so W prime. Our 180 rotations, 180, they stay in the same position as in the numbers, so -3, -2, the original points. They stay in their original locations, so 3 and 2. However, it becomes the opposite. So now instead of -3, it's +3, and instead of +2, it's -2. So they just become their inverse, their opposite integer, whatever that is. So if it's positive, positive, it becomes negative, negative. Negative, positive becomes positive, negative. And positive, negative becomes negative, positive. So 90-degree rotation, it is +3, -2. So I go to +3 down to -2. And this is my 180-degree rotation. And this is clockwise. So these are our clockwise rotations. Now for 270, same rule applies as 90. We have to reverse these two integers, so it becomes 2, -3. However, instead of making this number a positive, the first number becomes negative. So this stays -3, but this becomes a -2. So our first integer, our first number becomes the opposite. And then that's it. So I have -2, -3. And this is W prime, prime, prime. And that is 270 degrees counterclockwise. So those are our rules of clockwise rotations. 90 degrees, switch them around, second digit becomes the opposite. 180, stay in the same position, they just become their opposite integers. 270 is switch them around, and the second one becomes negative. This is if we're starting in quadrant 2, of course. All right, so let's do another point, and this time we're going to let's do W again. We're just going to go counterclockwise instead of clockwise. Or actually, let's do a different point than W. Let's do point let's do -4, +2, and we're going to do rotations counterclockwise. And this is going to be called point M. So to take point M, which is -4, 2, a 90-degree rotation counterclockwise means it's going to end up in quadrant 3. To do a 90-degree rotation, I take these digits, I switch them around so it becomes 2, -4. However, you'll notice in this quadrant, it's negative, negative, so that means my first digit must be a negative. Because if it's ending up in quadrant 3, they both have to be negative numbers. And that's it. So I switched them around and made my first digit negative. So I go -2 down to -4. And this is point M prime. Now to do my 180, same rules apply as when we were doing it before with point W. I keep them in the same spots, they just become their opposite integers. So -4 becomes +4, and +2 becomes -2. And then I just plot it, 4 down to -2. And this is point M prime prime, and that's our 180-degree rotation. And now we do our 270. Same rule applies as 90. So I basically make it 2, -4. However, because it's going to end up in quadrant 1, they both have to be positive numbers. So that means it can't be a -4, it has to be positive. So I take 2 and I go to +4. And that is point M prime prime prime. And that's our 270. So you guys seem to be doing really well from all the work that I looked at and everything. You guys were doing very well with this. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world. It does take practice. There are rules in place. The only thing is the best rules I could give you is if you were starting a point in quadrant 1, and I could just give you the rules if you were only ever doing a point from quadrant 1. The problem is sometimes your original point is in a different quadrant, so then the rules tend to change a bit. So the only way I could do is if you wrote out like 16 different rules, depending on where you're starting. And that's just a little bit too complex. So a lot of what we're doing is kind of based off of knowing what a rotation would look like. So right now we are going to do our review, or not our review, sorry. I'm totally in the wrong. There we go. We're going to do rotations of polygons. So this is going to be mainly triangles or four-sided shapes. Same rules apply for triangles and four-sided shapes, except instead of 3 points, you're rotating 4 points. But in this, and of course the same rules apply as singular points, except this time you're just doing multiple points. So if I'm starting in quadrant 1, I'm going to plot out a triangle for us, and that's going to be our example. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. So this is our triangle. I'm just going to call it triangle ABC. So I have A, B, and C. A is 2, +4. So +2, +4. B is 2, 1. And C is 5, 1. Now to do a rotation, I'm going to do one of each rotation. We're always going about the origin, so that's our center point. To rotate it, so let's do a 90-degree rotation starting off, and we're going to go clockwise starting off. So quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. All right, so 90-degree rotation. What do we do with individual points? Well, if it's a 90 or 270-degree rotation, we know that we have to switch these digits around. So it becomes 4, it becomes 4, 2. However, one of these digits has to be negative because we're ending up in this quadrant here. So what's going to happen is with our rotation, the second digit becomes negative. So it becomes 4 down to -2. And that's A prime. Now we apply the same rules to all the other points. So B, switch them up, so it becomes 1, 2. Second one becomes negative. So B is down here. 5 are for C, same thing, 1, 5. Second one becomes negative, so that becomes 1 down to 1, -5. Oh, I just realized I plotted B in the wrong spot. And I realized that I said A was 4 and it was actually 3 all along. You guys can tell it's been, my brain's not quite back from the long weekend yet. Sorry about that. So A should be over here. Sorry, that was completely my fault, not to confuse you guys, but I just accidentally plotted A in the wrong spot, or I just gave A the wrong number. All right, and that's our, whoops, our 90-degree rotation. So it should have been A was 2, 3. I just wrote it as 2, 4. That was my fault. So I just did the rotation correctly. I just wrote it down wrong. So it's supposed to be 3, -2. But that's our 90-degree rotation. Our 180-degree rotation, the numbers stay in the same spots. They just both become negatives. So it becomes, A becomes -2, -3. So -2 and -3. And then I apply the same rules to all my other points. So it becomes -2, -1, and this becomes -5, -1. And I just plot my points. So A is -2, -3, so -2 down to -3 is A prime prime. B is 2, or -2, -1, so -2, -1 is B prime prime, and C is -5, -1, C is prime prime. And then connect the dots, and it should look like an upside down image of your original. Obviously it doesn't because I can't draw a triangle very well, but the points are correct. There, that's better. So it looks like an upside down version of my original triangle. And then for 270, same rules apply as 90, except instead of my second digit becoming negative, it's my first digit. So I take 2, 3, it becomes 3, 2, with 3 being negative. So 3 to 2. So I'm just going to write these out. So it becomes 3, 2, except this time the first digit is negative. So this becomes -1, 2. So I switched them around. My first one became negative. 1, 5. Second one, or now my first one becomes negative. And then there we go. So I take -3 up +2. So that's my A prime prime prime, because I switched them around and I made my first digit negative. B, switch them around, first one's negative, so it's -1 up to -2. So this is my B. And then C, switch them around, first digit became negative, so -1 up to 5, which is C prime prime prime. Connect the dots, and there is all my rotations. If you ever have a question where you're doing all 3 rotations, 90, 180, and 270, oftentimes it kind of looks like a pinwheel, I find. And that's kind of what you're going for. So it looks like a proper rotation, because if something ended up being flipped over, like if this became over here and it was just looked like it was flipped over, you did a reflection and not a rotation. So we're going to do one more shape. We're just going to do it counterclockwise. This time I'm just going to do a 4-sided polygon. So I'm just going to erase this up pretty quick. Erase this quickly. and then we're just going to do our four-sided shape. You will sometimes have shapes that will overlap the origin. I don't do too many of them just because they are a little bit tricky. So for example, you could have a shape that is kind of like this, and you would be asked to rotate it about the origin. So it's basically being turned on itself. And that's where it becomes difficult, is because now I have a shape that's in all four quadrants. My rules for rotation just become a bit complicated. Here's the trick with shapes that are in the middle like this. For this point here, let's just call this point A, this is point B, this is point C, and this is point, D. If I'm doing a rotation, let's say I'm doing a 90-degree rotation counterclockwise. Here's a little trick that I find is sometimes useful. I find it works best for shapes that overlap in the origin. It does work for shapes that are just freestanding somewhere inside of a quadrant. However, again, it can be kind of tricky. So here's my trick. Let's say we're doing a 90-degree rotation counterclockwise. To get to A, I went 1, 2 over, and 1 up. So I went 2 over, 1 up. What I'm going to do to rotate A is, instead of going 2 over, 1 up, I go 1 over and 2 up. So I went 1 over and 2 up instead of 2 over, 1 up. And this becomes my A prime. Let me do that with B. So I went 1 over and 2 down. I switch it over. I go 2 over and 1 down. And I go over in this quadrant because I know it has to end up in this quadrant. Or sorry, in this quadrant. So I went 1 over, 2 down. It has to end up over here because it's a 90-degree rotation. So 1 over, 2 down, it becomes 2 over and 1 up. And this becomes B prime. So it's where A used to be. For C, it is 1 left, 3 down. It ends up over here. I go 3 right. So instead of left, I go right, and I go 1 down, which becomes my C prime. D is 2 left. So I just go from the origin, 2 down. And there is my new shape. Whoops, I can't draw a line, but there's our new shape. It's a little bit of a trick that you can use. If you understand it and you're able to do it effectively, then go for it. That's a wonderful trick to use for rotations. We tend to teach you just using the numbers because the numbers are a little bit more foolproof than just counting over and up, because sometimes you get confused as, oh, I went 2 left, but now I have to go 2 right, or now I have to go 1 right instead of 2. That's where it gets confusing, but it's a good trick to know if you ever want to use it. All right, so let's do another shape. We're just going to do a regular 4-sided polygon. So I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's go A, B, C, and D. And we're going to do, we did clockwise last time. We're going to go counterclockwise this time, each direction. So I have -5, 1, -2, 1. Whoops, I just realized I have 2 C's. D, -2, 1. This is -2, 3. And B is -4, 3. So we're going to do counterclockwise this time around. So 90 degrees, switch the digits around. So this becomes 1, -5. And in this case, I know I'm going to end up in quadrant 3 because it's a 90-degree rotation this way. Both digits have to be negative in order for it to be in this quadrant, so my first digit becomes negative. So I go 1, -5. And that's my A prime. B, switch them around, 3, -4. 3 must become a negative. So -3, -4. That's B. C, switch them around, so it becomes 3, -2. 3 must become a negative, so it goes -3, -2. So that is C prime. And D, I switch them around, so it becomes 1, -2. My first digit must become a negative, so I go 1, -2. And that is my D prime. And that is our rotated shape. Now for our 180-degree rotation, same spots, opposite integer. So 5, 1 becomes +5, -1. So +5 down to -1 is my A prime prime. B is, my originals is -4, 3. So it becomes +4, -3. So opposite integers. So +4 down to -3 is my B prime. C is, my original points are -2, +3. So this must become +2 and -3. So +2 down to -3 is our C prime prime. And D is, my original is -2, +1. So I must do +2, -1. And that's our D prime prime. Connect it up, and there is our rotation. So 180s, as you can see, are very simple. Same spot, opposite integer. And last but not least, our 270. So to do 270, I basically switch them around, except if I know I'm ending up in this quadrant, both numbers must be positive. So that's my giveaway right there. So A, I switch them around, so it becomes 1, -5. However, in order to end up in this quadrant, they both have to be positive. So I basically do, I do 1, +5. So 1 up to +5 is A prime prime prime. B, switch it up, so it becomes 3, 4. But they both have to be positive, so I get rid of that negative. So I go 3 up to 4 is B prime prime prime. C, switch them up, so it becomes 3, -2, except I get rid of that negative, so it becomes 3, 2. So 3 up to 2 is our C prime prime prime. And D becomes 1, -2, except I get rid of the negative, so it becomes 1, 2. And that's our D. Now I connect it up. And there is our final rotation. So I can see I did all the rotations right because now it looks kind of like a pinwheel. So that's it. You're basically just going to have shapes that are in their own quadrants that you rotate around the origin. There won't be any shapes, or at least not too many, that overlap in the origin. Use whatever method you like. So if it means switching the numbers around because that's what works best for you, do that. If just counting over and up and switching those around works best, you can also do that if you understood how that works. Email me if you have any questions whatsoever. And otherwise, I'm going to see you guys on Friday. Hopefully you have a fantastic week. Friday is going to be our last lesson on this unit. And then we're going to be moving on to our next unit. So I'll see you guys. Have a fantastic couple days. Hopefully enjoy some nice weather. And I'll see you guys on Friday.